And it was looked particularly grim with yesterday's anti-Semitic attack leaving 11 dead at a Pittsburgh synagogue. This was just days after an apparently racially motivated shooting in Louisville and a series of package bombs being sent to prominent critics of Donald Trump. It has been a time for sober reflection, or, if you're Fox News discussing those package bombs, a time for wild speculation, because before the suspect was even arrested, they were giving airtime to a truly ludicrous theory.
You talked in your notes earlier about the potential that it could be a false flag.
We cannot rule out that it's a false flag operation.
I feel these are false flag bombings.
At the risk of sounding like a far right-wing lunatic, I have to say that I believe that this whole thing was an elaborate hoax.
Yeah, but here's the thing about that. Sounding like a far right-wing lunatic is not really a risk for the Fox News brand, is it? It's more of a guarantee. It'd be like if Tony Bennett started every song with, "At the risk of making your grandma wet." What are you talking about, Tony? We all know that's going to happen. It's specifically what you're here to do. Now, once the suspect was found, and it was clear not just that the bombs were real, but that he was very much a Trump supporter, Geraldo apologised, tweeting, "Never mind, outsmarted myself in conjuring false flag operation." Now, can I just say that outsmarted myself is a brilliant way to say that you did something incredibly stupid. Wow, I really outsmarted myself this morning when I accidentally ate kitty litter instead of grape nuts. I remember thinking as I chewed the clumps, I truly am 2 steps ahead of me. But incredibly, even after the suspect's motivations were clear, some Trump supporters remained insistent that there was more to this story.
Obama probably sent his to himself, and Hillary Clinton probably sent hers to herself.
So you don't think this guy actually sent these bombs to these officials?
No, probably not.
Why?
They probably had it done. They may have paid him to do it.
What would be the upside of that?
Trying to bring people feeling over to their side.
And against Trump?
Yeah.
OK, I got it. So Obama flew to Florida, mailed a bomb to himself in Washington, then flew back just in time to avoid it, all to frame this guy. Now, I'm not saying that man's theory doesn't have any holes in it, but at least we can all agree he really outsmarted Geraldo Rivera. But for now, let's move on to Saudi Arabia, the country with bans on pork, alcohol and porn, or, as it's known in America, a Florida breakfast. Now, Saudi Arabia is continuing to deal with the ongoing fallout from the death of journalist Jamal Khashoggi, who disappeared after entering the Saudi Arabian consulate in Istanbul, which reportedly also contained 15 Saudi operatives who'd flown in with an autopsy specialist and a bone saw. The Saudis initially insisted that Khashoggi had left the embassy alive, but now admit that they'd incorrectly remembered what happened, or dismembered, if you will. Their story instead became that he'd been killed, but for good reason.
They say discussions led to a brawl, and he died in a fist fight.
Yeah, a fist fight. Apparently it started when they had a disagreement over whether or not Khashoggi should be murdered in cold blood. You see, he didn't think so, but the Saudis were really adamant it was a good idea, and, you know, one thing just led to another. Now, of course, this story was, as Khashoggi's editor at the Washington Post tweeted, utter bullshit, which should also definitely be the new term that the Post uses when fact-checking politicians. It's certainly better than using their current system of 1 to 4 Pinocchios. Come on, you're a journalistic institution. Why are you using a dishonest wood demon from a children's story? Now, the Saudis then abandoned that story and suggested that the killing may have been premeditated, which was obvious from the start, especially as it now appears the killers had the laziest of strategies to convince people that Khashoggi had left the consulate safely.
CNN aired what appears to be surveillance video, described to them by a Turkish source as one of the key suspects dressed in Khashoggi's clothes, even apparently a fake beard.
Oh, come on, that is pathetic. For a start, Khashoggi is bald and the body double has a full head of hair. If you're picking a body double for someone, you better make sure they look exactly like that person. That is why my body double is this owl. The resemblance is uncanny. You can't even tell which one is the real owl. After the Ralph-inducing devil's triangle that was last week, it really would have been nice if things had been a little bit better this week, but they frankly weren't. The UN released a climate report that said we may only have 2 good decades left. That study was then enthusiastically co-signed by one of the strongest hurricanes ever to make landfall in the US. Then, whatever the living fuck this was happened. And then, there was this.
Neil Armstrong. He's the man that planted the flag. Think of that. On the face of the moon. He planted that flag, that American flag, right on the face of the moon. There was no kneeling. There was no nothing. There was no games. There was no games. Boom. Boom.
How are you tying the NFL protest to Neil Armstrong? I mean, you are right, there was no kneeling, but also, no one was playing the national anthem, there was no football game scheduled in the Sea of Tranquility that day, or one more thing, no black astronauts had recently been shot by moon cops, so really, none of the essential ingredients had come together at that point. Now, Trump was at that rally because he was trying to whip up enthusiasm ahead of the midterms, which are now less than a month away. The ads are starting to roll out intensely, and some are undeniably pro-Trump, like this one from Florida gubernatorial candidate Ron DeSantis.
Everyone knows my husband, Ron DeSantis, is endorsed by President Trump, but he's also an amazing dad. Ron loves playing with the kids.
Build the wall.
He's teaching Madison.
Make America great again.
He reads stories.
Then Mr. Trump said, "You're fired." I love that part.
Okay, first, I think that's borderline child abuse right there. And second, I didn't think this could be done, but he produced an ad essentially saying the president's slogans are fairy tales for naive infant children and somehow intended it in a good way. Now, the one thing I will say for that ad is it's a rare example of positive messaging, because there is a growing concern that this year's campaigning is getting too nasty. Last Sunday, Eric Holder faced criticism after suggesting Democrats change their motto from when they go low, we go high, to when they go low, we kick 'em, which is both a massive pivot on political messaging and also happens to be my strategy for dealing with squirrels. When they go low, I kick them. When they go high, I swat them. And if they swarm, I do a move I like to call helicopter fists. Now, Trump, the grand wizard of civil discourse, called Holder's comments disgusting, which is clearly ridiculous coming from him, but it's also pretty hypocritical from the Republican Party in general, because just the day after Trump said that, their candidate for Pennsylvania governor said this.
Governor Wolf, let me tell you, between now and November 6th, you better put a catcher's mask on your face, because I'm going to stomp all over your face with golf spikes, because I'm going to win this for the state of Pennsylvania, and we're throwing you out of office, because you know what? I'm sick and tired of your negative ads.
Jesus Christ! How can you be anti-negative ads when your entire ad feels like a man getting into a fight in a garage? Put on a catcher's mitt, because I'm going to stomp on your face with golf cleats, pin you down with a leaf rake, jam your feet into a snowblower, and run you all over with my wife's 2015 Volvo station wagon, you worthless piece of shit! Let's raise the tone here, arsehole! Look, I'm not a fan of attack ads. They are never pretty, but every once in a while, someone comes along and truly elevates the form. And my favourite ad that has come out this campaign season was one in Texas, which really strikes at the essential essence of Ted Cruz.
Somebody left something on my door the other day. It said, Ted Cruz, toughest Texas. I mean, come on. If somebody called my wife a dog and said my daddy was in on the Kennedy assassination, I wouldn't be kissing their ass. You drag their ass out by the woodshed and kick their ass, Ted. Come on, Ted.
Come on! It's just his name. And yet somehow that final Ted might be the meanest thing ever said about Ted Cruz. That's devastating. Honestly, that ad could have had exactly the same impact if it were just 3 seconds long.
Come on, Ted.
Concerns Brazil, home of that one famous statue that I don't know the name of because I'm too embarrassed to Google, come at me bro, Jesus statue. Now, we tend to think of Brazil as being synonymous with soccer, beaches, and of course the Rio Carnival, the exuberant celebration that has inspired breathless newsreel reports since the 1930s.
Down in Rio, they're turning night into day. It's the final day of the big carnival, and a mere couple of million karaokers, Brazilians to you, are out on a great whoopee.
Yes, those fun-seeking karaokers are having themselves a great whoopee. What an excitable group of people they are. What a fun bunch. Now, I will be the first to admit, the tone of British newsreels in the past is breathtakingly condescending, although before you get too judgmental, you might want to see an American one from the same era.
Brazil itself is larger than the whole of the United States, and it has millions of acres of land that no white man has ever seen.
Whoa! Whoa! That basic geography lesson just took a pretty racist turn. The point is, none of us have our hands clean. Anyway, The reason that I want to talk about Brazil tonight is that they had a massive election today, the first of 2 rounds of voting to elect, among other things, a new president. And while results are coming in as we speak, it is worth talking about it for a number of reasons. First, Brazilian politics can be a lot of fun. As we've mentioned before, broadcasters have to provide free airtime to political parties, and some candidates use that airtime to really fuck around. Over the years, there have been ads for a guy dressed as a grasshopper, a dancing chicken, a small elderly version of Robin, a surprisingly healthy-looking Osama bin Laden, Captain America, a husky Spider-Man, and my favourite, Geraldo Wolverine.
Eu sou Geraldo Wolverine, o 11232.
Now, I know what you're thinking. If Hillary had just done that, things would have been a lot different. Well, maybe, but the point, we'll never know, will we? We'll never know. But look, this election has been crazy for reasons that go well beyond novelty Wolverines. And if you're thinking, why should I care about it? Well, first, that's a pretty hostile way to put it. But second, Brazil is home to 200 million people. It's the 5th largest country on Earth. And they could be on the brink of massive change because Brazilians are pissed off right now. One recent survey found that 95% of them say their country is headed in the wrong direction. As you will see tonight, there is a very real chance that they're about to elect a dangerous ideologue with potentially disastrous consequences. So let us look at why that is the case. And the first thing that you really need to understand is that Brazil is just emerging from the worst recession in its history. Millions are out of work, and in some regions, crime is out of control. Last year, there were more than 63,000 homicides in Brazil. That's more than Europe and the United States combined. And if you live in Rio, you're probably acutely aware of that fact.
30% of the citizens that lives in Rio was in the middle of a crossfire once in the last year.
30% were in the middle of crossfire. At that point, Rio's Weather Channel should probably include crossfire in their forecasts. Today's looking partly cloudy with a 30% chance of a hailstorm of bullets, so maybe bring a light flak jacket with you. And the general dissatisfaction about crime has been exacerbated by a gigantic corruption scandal arising from an investigation known as Operation Car Wash. And I realise that that doesn't sound like the name of a major investigation. It sounds like a Netflix original comedy starring Kevin James that for some reason you'll be recommended because you watched one episode of Chef's Table. I don't know what your algorithm is, Netflix, but I fucking hate it. Now, Operation Car Wash and the scandal uncovered by it is way too complicated to get into now. Suffice to say that it involved this gas station, these 2 companies, inflated contracts, bribes and kickbacks to government officials, and an elderly gentleman who flew around the world with bricks of cash, shrink-wrapped and strapped beneath thigh-high socks and a Spanx-like vest. Which really explains this year's hottest Halloween costume, Sexy Car Wash Co-Conspirator. And look, the sheer scale of this scandal is absolutely mind-blowing, as the lead prosecutor will tell you.
How does Car Wash compare to Watergate?
Car Wash is much, much bigger.
Bigger than Watergate?
Much bigger. We already have charged more than 200 people for hundreds of crimes. The amount of bribes paid go up to about $2 billion.
OK, so first, aside from being deeply disrespectful, have you is just not the answer of an innocent person. If you ask someone if they ever blew a dog and they go, I don't know, have you? That person blew a dog. He blew a fucking dog, and in all likelihood, not just one either. And that surly tone was emblematic of Kavanaugh's demeanour throughout the hearing. Not the tone of a man who hopes to one day have the honour of serving on the Supreme Court, but the tone of someone who feels entitled to be on it and frankly can't believe that you're being such a dick about this. And that actually does make some sense, because this is a man who has had every imaginable advantage. His elite high school, and this is true, has its own 9-hole golf course. Now, am I saying that someone who went to a school with its own golf course should not be on the Supreme Court? Yeah, I think I am. Yeah. Honestly, I didn't plan to when I started that sentence, but here we are, and I'm going to stand by it. But Kavanaugh didn't just rely on belligerence to refute Ford's charges. He brought evidence, specifically a calendar from 1982, about which he was, and I know this will shock you, weirdly emotional.
Why did I keep calendars? My dad started keeping detailed calendars of his life in 1978. He did so as both a calendar and a diary. Christmas time, we sit around and he regales us with old stories. old milestones, old weddings, old events from his calendars.
Now, look, I know that it may seem cruel to make fun of a man crying over his late father's calendars, but what if I were to tell you that his father is still alive and was sitting right behind him? That's him there! And that is why I am now completely comfortable saying that every Christmas we'd gather round and Dad would regale us with old events from his calendar is the single weirdest fucking thing I've ever heard anybody say. And to make it weirder, remember, Kavanaugh just said that his dad started keeping calendars in 1978, when Kavanaugh was 13, meaning he would have been 14 at the time his dad had even a single calendar to read to his children from. And an adult man reading last year's calendar to his 14-year-old son is literally the saddest Christmas I can imagine, other than being one of the innocent people who gets murdered in the movie Die Hard. That is literally the only other example. And the truth is, Kavanaugh's calendar may not have actually helped him, because while he told the panel he never attended a gathering like the one Dr. Ford describes in her allegation, in fact, his calendar shows at least one similar event, with at least two of the people Ford named in her letter. And Kavanaugh misrepresenting the truth actually became something of a really troubling pattern. For instance, he repeatedly made this strong claim to poke holes in Ford's story.
I just want to re-emphasize, all four witnesses who are allegedly at the event have said it didn't happen, including Dr. Ford's longtime friend, Ms. Kaiser.
Except this 53-year-old frat pledge is actually significantly misstating the facts there, because in reality, three of those people merely said that they didn't recall the party as described, and Ford's friend, Ms. Kaiser, did specifically say she believes Ford's allegation, and the fourth person there is Kavanaugh himself. So Kavanaugh just wildly mischaracterised evidence, and that is one thing a judge really should know not to do. It's basically that and don't tuck your robes into your blue jeans, because it's objectively a bad look. Then there was the fact that for all of Kavanaugh's talk of his wholesome teenage years spent respecting women for their friendships and doing sick reps in Tobin's dad's house, his high school yearbook tells a very different story. For instance, he and his bro friends brag about being Renata alumni, referring to a girl that they knew. Now, Kavanaugh claims that that was completely asexual and just clumsily intended to show affection, and that she was one of us, which is a little hard to believe, given that A, Renata only just found out about it and said the insinuation is horrible, hurtful, and simply untrue, and B, if it was just affection for a friend, where's the alumni society for Amy? Or Julie? Or Kristen, or Karen, or Maura, especially Maura. Maura most of all. Now, Kavanaugh had similarly implausible explanations for other terms in the yearbook, specifically those commonly associated with drinking or sex.
Have you, I don't know if it's buffed or boofed, how do you pronounce that?
Yeah, you actually don't. I mean, it's something that everyone naturally assumes, but it is weird to hear it out loud. It's like a Disney World park attendant saying, hey kids, who wants to have their photo taken with a 30-year-old theatre major who couldn't hack it in the industry and who now wears a full-body mouse suit? I mean, there's no new information there, but it is still unpleasant to listen to. But just focusing on the famous alligators in Trump's swamp is missing some of the most important damage that is getting done by lesser-known bureaucrats. And to illustrate that, let's look at two agencies tonight. First, the EPA. Now, for a year, it was run by Scott Pruitt, who became a household name for doing things like spending $40,000 on a soundproof booth in his office, trying to get the CEO of Chick-fil-A to give his wife a franchise, and demanding an expensive 24/7 security detail, then making it drive him around town to see which Ritz-Carlton had the lotion he liked. Which is simply insane, because everyone knows the best lotion comes from La Quinta Inn. That's right. If you want to masturbate with hotel lotion, choose La Quinta. It's like their slogan says, La Quinta has the lotion that will help you jizz. Now, once Pruitt left, there were not as many flashy headlines about the EPA, but that itself is actually dangerous, because he was not an isolated case. Nearly half of the political appointees hired by Trump at the EPA have strong industry ties, and the guy who replaced Pruitt is not much of an improvement.
The man tapped to be Pruitt's replacement? Andrew Wheeler, a man who Forbes says earned more than $700,000 in recent years as, wait for it, a coal lobbyist.
Yeah, at this point, though, CNN, you really don't need to ask the American people to wait for it. Surprise is just one more emotion that Trump has completely destroyed, along with joy, wonder, and the ability to see someone wearing a red hat from behind without mentally saying, God damn it. Now, as a coal lobbyist, Wheeler pushed hard to roll back environmental regulations impacting the industry. In fact, here he is, as a lobbyist, meeting with Rick Perry, doing exactly that. And little over a year later, he is running the EPA and dismantling the very regulations he lobbies against, which is ridiculous. It's like handing your city's waste management over to a seagull. So let me get this straight. The new strategy is we just throw our trash everywhere and leave it strewn around, and we should have more French fries in our garbage. How the fuck are you in charge? But Wheeler is actually a really good example of how once Trump's swamp starts seeping in, it can filter all the way down an organisation. And for just how deep it can go, simply look at the Department of the Interior. On this show, we've lavished quite a bit of attention on Trump's appointee to head them, Ryan Zinke, which is understandable. He rode a horse to work on his first day at the department. He swung Karen Pence around like a bag of potatoes. And despite the fact that he is very much not a geologist, he has a weird habit of doing this.
That's the question I asked. And I'm a geologist. I'm a geologist. I'm a geologist. I'm a geologist. I'm a geologist.
He's not a geologist at all. Besides, bragging about being a geologist is a very weird boast. It's just behind walking around saying, I own crackers. Saltines, Cheez-Its, you name it, I own it. Not oyster crackers, of course. Who am I, Bill Gates? Zinke has also taken 66 personal days in his first year and a half on the job and has been the subject of no less than 15 investigations. And reportedly, he may actually be gone any day now. But even if that happens, serious problems will remain because the swamp runs deep. Interior is a massive department and there is real power at every level. I'll show you. Look at this organisational chart. Below Zinke, and the Deputy Secretary and the Assistant Secretary for Land and Minerals Management, you will find a very important subdivision called the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement, or BESI, which is in charge of safety on offshore oil rigs. And I know what you're thinking. Safety on offshore oil rigs? Wouldn't regulatory oversight of any resource development on the outer continental shelf fall under the jurisdiction of the Minerals Management Service? Wouldn't that be where the responsibility lies, John? To which I say, congratulations on being a sex god. And you know what? You're right. The Minerals Management Service actually used to be in charge of safety until 2010, when there was that catastrophe at Deepwater Horizon.
This is the video BP did not want the world to see. A toxic blend of oil and gas spewing from its broken well at the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico.
How good was A Star is Born?
I did see A Star is Born over the weekend.
Yes, a great movie.
And it was amazing. It was amazing.
It's still on my heart. Like, that is the thing.
It lingers. It grabs
really
you,
does.
Bradley Cooper had a hold of my soul there for a little while. It is beyond great.
Maybe it's time to let the old ways die. Bradley Cooper, oh my gosh. Tears. Amazing. Go see the movie. Go see it.
Yeah. That guy loves it, and he's the centre for the Dallas Cowboys. No one doesn't like A Star is Born. It's the one movie that even Neil deGrasse Tyson can't ruin.
John, I had a small issue with the film. See, if you want to know how a star is actually born, you start with a gas cloud.
Shut up! You shut up, Neil deGrasse Tyson! Let this be the one thing about stars you don't fucking ruin! Now, unfortunately, we're not talking about A Star is Born tonight. In fact, we're going to talk about the exact opposite of that movie. The troubling rise of authoritarian leaders around the world. Because there has been a lot of them. There are the ones that you instinctively think about, like Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping, who've been steadily consolidating their power. There's the re-election of strongmen like Hungary's Viktor Orban and Turkey's Recep Erdogan. And then there's what happened just last month in the world's 5th largest country.
Brazil has a new president, becoming the latest nation to elect a far-right leader.
Extreme right populist Bolsonaro has exalted the country's military dictatorship, advocated torture, and threatened to destroy, jail, or drive his political opponents into exile. He's calling for unity.
Oh, that's nice. He's calling for unity, is he? Yeah, the problem is he expressed an affection for torture and dictatorship before that, and political platforms are a bit like Tinder profiles. Once you advocate torture, it doesn't really matter what else you say. It's all people are going to remember, and for good reason. And look, while no two authoritarian leaders are the same, the global trend toward them is alarming, especially because in many cases people are actively choosing them. A report recently concluded that 1/3 of the world's population lives in a backsliding democracy. And that is why there's a pretty good chance that you may have been watching the news at some point this year and found yourself saying, what the fuck is happening to the world and why? So tonight, Let's look at 3 common traits that authoritarian leaders tend to have to try and figure out what can make them so appealing to people and to what extent this country is in danger of heading in the same direction. And the first trait is projecting strength. Authoritarians tend to love grand displays of force, like the military parades featuring weaponry that you see in places like China, North Korea, Venezuela and Russia, where they'll even sometimes throw in a surprise musical number. Yeah, word of warning there, Russia. That's what musicals are like when you don't allow gay people. Now, experts will tell you that spectacles like those serve a purpose, as many authoritarians project strength out of a real concern that they may be seen as illegitimate, in kind of the same way that a man who is insecure about his penis buys a motorcycle, or takes up bodybuilding, or invents the Tesla. How weird is your penis, Elon? How weird is it? But projecting military strength often isn't enough. Many authoritarians tend to conflate their country's national identity with their personal identity, so they individually need to appear strong too. The most obvious example of this is Vladimir Putin, who's taken so many glamour shots, there are calendars of him. The latest ones feature him cuddling leopards, taking a shirtless ice bath and sunbathing, which... cool. But he's not alone. There's also Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov's ridiculous workout videos, which I frankly cannot recommend highly enough. It's like watching a Keebler elf get ripped. Although my favourite example of this is also actually the saddest. Just watch as the authoritarian president of Turkmenistan forces his cabinet to watch him take a gold bar and do whatever this is. Wow. When you go to work tomorrow and you're forced to laugh at your supervisor's dumb jokes, just spare a thought for the people who had to give a standing ovation to their boss for lifting a golden curtain rod.